Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good break and a good time for networking. It's a pleasure to welcome you back to our next session, which is going to be on healing PK and subtle energies. My name is Mark Kruth, and I am the chair of the Monroe Institute's Outreach Leadership Council. And it's my great pleasure to be your host for this session. And I'd like to introduce you a little bit to our speaker, who is going to give a video presentation. The speaker is John Kruth. He's the executive director of the Rhine Research Center in Durham, North Carolina. His research interests include psychokinesis, bioenergy and healing, physical correlations with psi experiences, and near and dear to my own heart, the application of potentially useful psi technologies. So rather than me saying one more word, let's just kick off the video and we'll come back at the end of the session for questions. And I think John is with us, so he'll address them directly. All right, thanks a lot, and we'll see you later.
I am the program chair for the upcoming conference for the Society for Scientific Exploration and the Parapsychological Association. I'm also the executive director of the Rhine Research Center in Durham, North Carolina, and co-founder of the Rhine Education Center and the education chair or education director for the Rhine Education Center that's sponsoring. But you don't need to hear more about me. I do research in parapsychology. I work within the field and help to coordinate people to get together. And that's what this conference is all about: connections. But I have a lot to talk about today. I don't know what made me think I could cover healing, PK, and subtle energies all in one 30-minute talk. I have a whole course on this that I teach at the Rhine Education Center, but I'm going to try to go through it quickly and give you guys an overview. My goal today is to provide terminology and let you know what you might be hearing about in the conference, because you're going to hear a lot about some of these topics. So let's get started here. And I'm going to start just by talking about what is PK and what is energy healing, and just give you a really quick introduction to the phenomena. Psychokinesis, telekinesis, PK, mind-matter interaction, all these different words. People use these words for so many different things. For my purposes today, they're all the same. We're talking about one thing here. You'll hear me using psychokinesis, PK, mind matter interaction. I don't use the term telekinesis. Telekinesis is a term that kind of developed and was very popular when television was coming into vogue. And the whole idea behind telekinesis, the use of it, the concept is that there's a central broadcasting center that is affecting receiving units in different locations. And that was the idea of how telekinesis worked. It doesn't seem to work that way from all of our research that we've done. And so I consider this a theory-laden term, something that contains some obsolete theory within it. So I don't use that term. Other people you might hear using it for other purposes, but I tend to stick with PK, psychokinesis, or mind-matter interaction. So what is it? Well, it's a direct influence on physical systems that cannot entirely be accounted for by physical energies. Or another way of saying it is affecting objects without physically touching them or using any physical means to influence them. Now, why didn't I just say, well, you're intentionally affecting physical objects with the power of the mind? Because that's what a lot of people think about. Well, one of the reasons I didn't say that is that it's not always intentional. And so to give a good definition, we have to recognize there are some times it occurs unintentionally. Or what about using mental energies to project a force upon objects? Well, we don't know that they're mental energies. We don't recognize it. It's not clear that it comes from the mind. It's not clear that it's intentional. And the other thing we're talking about that says projecting a force on objects, when we measure it, we're not able to measure. We see the objects move at times or having an influence on them, but we haven't been able to measure a force on them. It's not clear that's what we're dealing with here. So I'm sticking with my definitions that I gave you first. Direct influence on physical systems that cannot entirely be accounted for by physical energies. So when you look in popular culture and in the media, you see many different representations of PK. You'll see poltergeists where you have chairs flying around the room. You'll see in the Matrix where spoons are bending. You'll see in Carrie where cars are flying up in the air. Yoda makes spaceships float and does a lot of other things as well. You see The Exorcist and people levitating in the air. All of these things, they're fun, they're interesting. I love these things. I watch them all the time, but it's not really what we see. When we look at PK in the lab, what it really looks like is they're typically small effects. We typically see very small visible objects or even microscopic objects that are being affected. For example, up there on the left, you see that little jar with a aluminum foil pinwheel in it. The pinwheel, people were able to move that pinwheel within the jar without touching it, without affecting it with any heat or light or anything else. We've really controlled these situations very carefully, and still people were able to cause those objects to move, stop, reverse direction, move the other way. So these small objects, no cars are floating around, but that's a pretty cool effect to see whenever no one's touching it and it's moving. We use other more complex ways to measure it as well. Spoon bending is something that often people consider a form of psychokinesis. We also have effects sometimes on electronics, but usually these effects that we see, they're inconsistent. People aren't doing them all the time. Now I say that, but I have to also say that I've been really lucky in the research I've done. I've had participants come to my laboratory who are extremely consistent. It's really unusual. There are many people in the field of parapsychology who have never seen psychokinesis or PK happen. They've never seen it, and they doubt whether it's real or not. But in my lab, it happens. It happens to the point that I can say that I have some people who I can see them doing it consistently, but typically it's a very inconsistent phenomenon. It doesn't always happen. You can't rely on it. In addition, some effects that we see can only be measured as statistical anomalies. What you would expect to happen from chance, something different occurs, and it happens enough that we can say it looks like there's an effect here. So what's going on? What are these things? Well, when we talk about PK, we use two different terms, and you're going to hear these terms within the conference in next week. One is macro PK, and the other is micro PK. Now, macro PK is something that affecting objects that you can actually see. You're usually affecting larger objects. It's visible effects. Things like having the wheel spin within a jar. You see it happening. You can see what's going on. If someone were to cause a pencil to roll across a table, that would be a visible effect, something you could actually see. Then you have micro PK, which is affecting very small or microscopic objects, things you can't see with the naked eye. Oftentimes, it might involve affecting electronics. How can electronics be affected without us touching them or without us having, but sometimes they are affected, and having effects on electronics would be a form of micro PK. In addition, there's some effects that you can only see statistically. For example, there's quantum events that occur, and typically in random number generators we have quantum events, but you can't really see that there's a difference between what you see and whether is there really something there. And only by looking at the statistics and analyzing it over a longer period of time can you tell if there is truly a PK effect occurring there. Now, I say we have these two different words, and we do use these words, macro PK and micro PK, and they sound really different. One is objects you can see. The other one is something so small that you have to look at statistics or use a microscope. These are not distinct and separate phenomena. We use them in order to explain what we're looking at in laboratory and what we see when we're doing our research. But it's really, we see a spectrum. There are some phenomena that you can't really classify as micro PK or macro PK. It kind of goes on this continuum here. For example, if I'm rolling a dice and I'm able to roll the dice and make the numbers I want to come up, you could say, well, that's macro PK. You can see the dice, you can see the numbers coming up. But actually, I'm not like making the dice float in the air and kind of move around and go back to the table. That would be macro PK. But when I roll the dice, there's actually a lot of very small forces that are causing that the die to move in a certain way and maybe causing that number to come up. So you can interpret that as micro PK also, but it's not strictly macro or micro PK. It's somewhere in that yellow area there on the continuum. So recognize the terms and recognize when you hear them, this is what they mean, but also realize they're kind of an artificial distinction that we're making here. Let me move on to energy healing, because like I said, I got a lot to cover here. And I'm going to just talk a little bit about what it is. Energy healing, as the term, we typically use the term, it's the influence of a person or a number of people on another living thing, whether it be people, animals, plants, without using physical means to affect them. And typically it's for the purposes of improving the health or well-being of an organism. People use the term psychic healing, energy healing, or sometimes they just say healing. All of these terms, I'm grouping them together. It's a different way that people approach the topic, but they all involve one person or a group of people having an effect on another living thing, oftentimes to try to improve the health or well-being of the organism. Early studies. I'm not getting into a whole lot of research studies related to these topics. There's a lot of information available, but the early studies, when they were doing research on healing, healers would treat the patients, do whatever they do to treat the patients. Usually they put their hands next to them. Sometimes they touch them, sometimes they don't. But the patient is examined before and after to determine if there's any change. Well, it seems like a pretty obvious way to determine whether healing is occurring. But the question comes up, what is the source of the healing? Did that person just take some medication beforehand and then be treated by the healer? Were they treated by another medical professional before the healer came and did their work? What is the source of the healing? And did it come from the healer themselves? Or was the healer channeling energy or channeling some healing activity from another source? This is all questions that needed to be answered. And so the early studies were exploring this. Also, the question came up, how long does it take for healing to occur? Because if healing occurs within, a week or a few weeks, sometimes, it can take months before the healing effect accumulates enough to happen, but sometimes it can be very quick. And very quick, I mean, it could happen overnight. It could happen in a few hours. It can happen in a few minutes. And there's a guy in Australia who some of you might know as Charlie, who actually performs healings within 20 to 30 seconds oftentimes. And it's very, very, very effective what he does. So these are some of the things that the early studies looked at. Later on, when this was taken into the lab, there are some really significant studies that were done. The first I'm going to mention here was some work that was done in the 1960s by a man named Bernard Grad. And this man really was a genius related to this, testing this phenomena, so much that his studies seem commonplace now. What he did is he took healers and had them treat water. And then he used that water to water plants and tried to determine if the plants grew better when they were watered with when they were treated with water from the healers, or when they were watered with water that wasn't treated at all. So you had a control group, just regular water, and an experimental group, water treated by the healer. And he took the plants as they grew and kept them in the same conditions, and then said, hey, which ones grew better? Which are taller? Which have more leaves? Which have less bugs or less disease associated with them? And he found very clearly the water that was treated by the healer caused the plants grew better when they were watered using the water treated by the healer. So that is actually a foundational study, and almost all research in healing that's been done since then is based on this same paradigm. It's a great model for testing healing. In the 1970s, a few years later, Watkins and Watkins, working at the Ryan Research Center, did a study with animals. They were actually working with mice, and Graham Watkins is a zoologist, and he anesthetized the mice. And then he had healers trying to wake them up. And so he would take mice that were anesthetized and put two mice next to each other, have the healer treat one of them and see if it woke up more quickly than the other mice that wasn't being treated by the healer. Well, it was kind of inconsistent. Sometimes the mouse that was being treated would wake up, sometimes the other one would wake up, but overall, the mouse that was being treated by the healer woke up more quickly than the mouse that wasn't being treated by the healer. He also found a continuing effect that he called the linger effect, that the location the mouse was being treated seemed to hold some energy in it, because the next mouse that was placed there tended to wake up more quickly as well, whether it was treated or not. So it's a very interesting study done in the 1970s by Watkins and Watkins. A little later, a man named Larry Dossey, who you might have heard of previously, did a study related to intention and prayer to see if when people pray, people often say, I'll pray for you whenever someone is ill, or, I'll keep you in my mind. Well, Larry Dossey actually did a study, and he had people being prayed for and people using their intention. And he tried to see, is there an effect of intention and prayer? Does it cause people to heal more quickly? Larry did find that it seemed that prayer and intention had an effect and allowed and encouraged people to heal better. But at the same time, he also found it was really hard to get a control group, because when someone is praying for a certain group, they usually don't limit it to only the people you want to have in your study. It also kind of affects other people that are in the same hospital, in the same building. And so the effects seem to spread out, and more people got healed than he would have expected. But hey, that's not a bad thing. It just doesn't really help us to improve the concept and scientifically. And then there are modern approaches to healing, including some done by Bill Bankston. Bill is the president of the Society for Scientific Exploration, and you will definitely meet him at the conference if you come to the conference next week. Bill has developed a healing technique based on some work that he had done back in the 1990s. And since about 2000, he's been publishing some incredible and amazing results he's gotten using this technique with mice. What they use is they use a standard kind of mouse model they use for cancer treatments. And typically you have a mouse and they would inject it with the cancer cells. And then in normal research, they would treat it with a chemotherapy drug and see how the mouse survives. Well, Bill did this exact same model, except instead of using chemotherapy and drugs, he used the healing technique. And he's gotten incredible results. The mice live. They are healed of the cancer, and they cannot be reaffected when they are re-injected with cancer later. It's amazing information. I can't go into it in detail, but if you ever talk to Bill, ask him about it. He talks about it all over the place, and you'll definitely hear about it at the conference. But the question comes to mind then, is all healing the same? When we talk about healing, people use many different techniques. You hear things like Reiki, you hear healing touch, you hear hands-on healing, you hear Qigong, esoteric healing, many different methods of healing. You hear Barbara Brennan method, you hear the Bill Bankston method. All of these but Are they really different? They're different techniques, but is it all the same kind of, is healing really the same thing, or is it actually different things occurring? Some people say that all healing is actually self-healing, and that maybe the healer isn't actually doing the healing themselves, but they're causing some activity to occur that allows healing to occur in another individual. And the other question that comes up is healing a form of PK. Within the field of parapsychology, you're going to hear, and you'll hear this at the conference, you'll hear many people saying that healing is a form of PK. It's not, it is a common accepted theory within the field, but when we take healers and we ask them to perform PK, most of them can't. We test them for PK and they can't do it. So how is it different? Why can these healers do healing, but they can't do PK? And if they're doing this, how can we say that PK and healing are the same? We're going to talk about that in just a couple minutes. But first, I want to get into intention. Remember, I was talking at the beginning about PK and the idea that, hey, I can't say that you purposely did this. Well, this is the whole point of intention. Did you do that, or did it just happen? So I'm going to give you some examples of intentional PK. Remember that wheel we had within the jar? Well, spinning that wheel within the jar, focusing on it and saying, I want that wheel to spin, and causing it to spin is a form of intentional PK. You have a random number generator that's causing numbers to just occur ones and zeros at random, completely random moments, and trying to change it so that it's not as random, getting a lot more ones than you would expect from chance, maybe getting a lot more zeros. If you're focusing on it, that's intentional PK, making changes to the random number generator. Causing an object to move, whether it's a pencil on a table or something, like a picture to fall off the wall, focusing on something and causing it to move is a form of intentional PK. Having a compass, where you have the needle on the compass that's affected by magnetic fields and causing that compass needle to move in one direction and another, that is a form of intentional PK. Now, let me give you some examples of unintentional PK. Spinning a wheel, changing a random number generator, moving an object, affecting the needle. They're the same because it's not about the effect, but it's about the purpose. Was the effect produced purposely? All of those things I just described, some people can focus, and you may see them happen when they focus, but it can also happen unintentionally or unconsciously. So the question is, was the agent, the person who's causing it to occur, aware, conscious of the activity, aware that it was going to happen? And I have to mention that sometimes these effects that I'm mentioning, they can be helpful, but sometimes they're not so helpful, and they can actually be disruptive. And we'll catch up on that in a second too. Unconscious PK and unconscious healing. Here's just a couple of examples. Poltergeists. Many people, when they think of the term poltergeist, they think of ghosts or spirits that are disruptive, that are throwing things around the room. They think of spirits that are making loud noises and banging on things, because poltergeist is actually ghosts. So poltergeist is kind of a noisy or disruptive ghost. And so the idea of a disruptive ghost is what most people think of. But within the field of parapsychology, we actually use this term recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, RSPK. Psychokinesis that is spontaneous. It occurs spontaneously, and it happens repeatedly. We use this term to describe this phenomena, and we also consider, since about the 1950s, it was around before then, but since around the 1950s, this has been a pretty accepted explanation for when we see these phenomena occur. And what phenomena am I talking about? Someone's in a room and objects start moving around them, or they're in a certain location and it might be that loud noises, banging on the wall seems to occur. It seems like there's a lot of unusual activity around someone that you can't explain by they're not physically doing anything, but someone obviously has an effect on things. Sometimes you might see this that would cause things to break. Things, things fall off the wall and break. But other times you may see them actually doing helpful things. Like you might find that I had a friend who was having these types of things happen to her, and what was happening is she was at a door and she needed to drop her keys off to get her car fixed, and everything was locked, and she got frustrated because a lot of times this comes from emotions, anxiety. She got frustrated and the door unlocked. It was an electrical lock. It unlocked and she was able to leave her keys. And then she called the police and said, hey, this door is unlocked, but it was locked beforehand. So sometimes they can actually be helpful occurrences as well. But the idea that they come from an agent and that they are oftentimes unconscious expressions of anxiety, sometimes suppressed or repressed emotions. This is where the concept RSPK comes from. There are some newer interpretations of poltergeist, which you can hear at the conference by a man named Jerry Solfin, Brian Williams, and Lloyd Auerbach, who you're going to hear about a little later this afternoon. In addition, besides poltergeist, electrical interferences, having effects on electronics. We all carry phones with us these days. Well, not everybody, but pretty much everybody has a phone with them. A lot of people work on computers, as you are right now. And some people notice that there's some interference that occurs occasionally. They're not doing it on purpose. But I actually did a study in a lab a couple of years ago where what we did is we brought people in and we purposely checked to see if their anxiety level would have an effect on creating errors in the computer system. Not that they would make more errors whenever they were using a computer, but that the actual electronics would have more errors in it. And we found, yeah, when people develop stronger anxiety, their electronics start acting up and they don't work as well. So the answer here is, if you're seeing that happening, take a break, walk away, take a breath, lean back from your computer, walk for a while, come on back, calm down, and see if it went away, because sometimes it does. So that's unconscious PK, but unconscious healing can also happen. Spontaneous healings. There are, we talk about healing. Healing just occurs, but spontaneous healings, you may see, there are cases where, for example, there was a man a few years ago who had, well, a number of years ago, he had cancer and he was on the verge of death and he died. And he literally physically died. But after an hour or so, his heart started beating and he came back to life again. So he didn't really die, but he had a near-death experience during that time. And when he was revived, the cancer that was in his body disappeared over the next few days. He died from complications related to the cancer. And within just a few days, that cancer resolved itself. Spontaneous healing. Another man had arthritis throughout his whole body that had developed over years. He had let's say he had an event that evoked a spontaneous healing, and the arthritis disappeared within just a few days. And he hasn't had it since. So spontaneous, but it's not something he did consciously. These people were not, and especially the man who's dead, he wasn't consciously trying to heal himself, but the healings occurred. And sometimes you'll see this with healers working with someone. They'll be working with someone and there'll be a spontaneous healing event that'll occur as well within the person. But what about self-healing? Well, if I cut my finger, my finger is going to start healing. I'm not thinking, oh, I have to heal my finger and focusing and consciously trying to make my finger. No, it just happens naturally to me. So this self-healing is something that is also a form of unconscious healing. D-mills. This is another term you're going to hear at the conference, and you'll hear this oftentimes in parapsychology: distant mental influence on living systems. Sometimes it's called direct mental influence on living systems. Well, what is this? Well, look at the terms, okay? Mental influence on living systems. Somebody has an intention to affect a living system from a distance, or directly affect a living system from a distance. Types of things that might be considered a form of DMILs are remote healing. Most healers, there are many healers who put their hands on you and they touch people and they do their healing that way, but there are other people who actually do their healing from a distance. They do it over the phone. They do it through Zoom or Skype. They do it from a distance, sometimes from thousands of miles away. And it works as well as if they were in the room. This would be an example of DMILs, affecting a living system from a distance. There was a man named Vasiliev, L.L. Vasiliev, who worked in the Soviet Union back in the 1920s through the 40s, and then kind of got revived a little later to do more work. He was trying to see if he could evoke the hypnotic state in someone from a distance. Could you hypnotize someone from a mile away, many miles away? Could you affect their consciousness, their state of mind from a distance? And he apparently was starting to have some success with this when, about in the 1940s, his research was defunded and he lost his, he couldn't continue with it until later he came back and started doing something. But at the same time in the Soviet Union, there was this book in 1970 that was published called Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain. And in this book, two researchers had been in the Soviet Union, and they had been learning about the different research that was going on related to parapsychology. And one of the things they found was that there were people trying to learn to cause physical damage to another person from a distance, to evoke a heart attack, to maybe cause confusion, cause someone to become ill. And some of the purpose behind this seemed to be related to espionage, trying to disrupt negotiations, trying to physically harm someone from a distance. This is a very disturbing thing. And when this book was published and the people in the States found out that this research was going on in the Soviet Union, the intelligence agency in the state has a response to it. And that response ended up resulting in the psychic spying program that eventually was called Project Stargate. You're going to hear more about that from Paul Smith a little later this afternoon as well. But these are types of examples of DMILs, affecting living systems from a distance. Some of you may have seen this movie that came out a number of years ago called Men Who Stare at Goats. Well, that was said to be loosely based on some work that was being done in the States. They had these goats that are called fainting goats. They're goats, not ghosts. Goats, animals. They had fainting goats. And these goats, whenever they get excited or threatened, they fall over as if they're fainting, and they'd stay still. So the idea behind that movie was that they were having people stare at the goats and trying to evoke that response, trying to affect the living system from a distance. These are all examples of DMILs. So if you hear that term DMILs, realize we're talking about healing or disrupting living systems from a distance. So then the question comes up, how does it all work? Right? How does this work? How are we going to explain all this healing and PK stuff? We're working in the laboratory. Is it something related to quantum physics? Are we finding some physical mechanism, some energies that we can use it? Or maybe perhaps it's aliens? Well, the truth is, we don't know. There are a lot of theories. And I'm mentioning this, and I could go through theories with you, but it would take me much longer than I have today. If you go to the conference, you'll hear a number of different theories related about how PK works, how subtle energies are developed, how healing occurs. There are a number of speakers who are part of the conference who will be talking about these facts. Look for more information in other sources. We really don't know how it works right now. I got to move on now to subtle energies, though, because I just have a few minutes left. And this is a really interesting and important topic. Subtle energies are energies of the human body. Let me first talk about the energies of the human body, because these are things that a lot of people know about. There are electrical charges in our bodies. Our nervous system, all of our nerves there's electrical signals and electrical impulses that cause our nerves to allow us to feel, allow us to move. All of this is electrical in nature. EEGs, brain waves, electroencephalograms is what they're called. EEGs, this is electrical activity in the brain. There are some chemical reactions in the body, and these chemical reactions produce electrical charges occasionally. There are ways to measure it. This is not parapsychology. This is biology or physics, depending upon how you look at it, or chemistry in some cases. But the reason I'm mentioning it is because these are very small charges, really tiny. You notice this man in this picture here, and he has this cap on with all these electrodes pressed really tightly against his head. That's to measure the electrical activity that's occurring within his brain. You can see it, but you have to push really hard on the skin. It has to be pressed really tightly, and it has to be very sensitive sensors. Same thing with the nervous system. You can measure that against the skin, and you can measure the electrical activities. But if you start to move away from the skin, even if you move a centimeter away, which is, a little more, about quarter of an inch, or a little more, a third of an inch or something, even if you move a little bit away from the skin, you don't see it at all. You can't measure it. Well, in most cases, there are special situations, but I'll get into that. But essentially, these electrical charges can only be measured inside the body or directly on the skin. Getting far away from the body, even as more than a few millimeters away from the body, you cannot measure these electrical charges in normal situations. Oh, free radicals. I don't have time to get into free radicals, but I wanted to mention it here because free radicals are something you might hear about. They're related to a topic called grounding or earthing, which is touching the ground with your physical body to allow these free radicals to travel. I'm not going to go into details, but there are some potential health benefits. You might hear about this in the conference, and you can look it up if you want to know a little bit more about free radicals. But what I do want to talk about is magnetic fields, because people often talk about healing, or they talk about psychokinesis as if it's magnetic in nature. Well, within the body, there's electrical currents. Anywhere there are electrical currents, there's a magnetic field. This is standard electrical engineering. There's a magnetic field anytime there's electricity flowing. Within the body, we call this biomagnetism. It's something where you can see that you can find there are certain magnetic properties to the body. But again, it can only be measured by very sensitive devices. Really, it's not strong enough. Again, you move off the skin and you really can't measure this magnetic field. There are some instruments that can measure it, but in order to measure the magnetic field or the electrical field from more of a distance away from the body, you have to have people in a completely shielded room that shields out all other magnetic fields, all other electrical fields, all the cell phone information that's flowing around, all the electronic noise that's around us. You have to have them in a Faraday cage, but not only in a Faraday cage, but it has to block out everything you can and keep it very, very electronically and magnetically quiet. And then a distance from the body, you can start to measure the very, very weak magnetic fields. So these are the energies of the body. Now, why am I going into these? Well, some of you may be familiar with this diagram. And I apologize if it's so familiar that you are recognizing the organization it comes from. I'm not criticizing the organization in any way. But this diagram is supposed to represent the magnetic fields of the body. And you notice there's a one centered around the heart, and there's one that's a larger one that encompasses the whole body from over the top of the head down to the crown, the base chakra. We'll talk about chakras in a minute. And this is supposedly a diagram of the magnetic field of the body. But as I mentioned, we don't have any instruments to measure this. So is there a human magnetic field? Yeah, but it doesn't extend out to this level. So I'm going to put this, no, it doesn't really happen. But why do these people indicate this? Well, what they do is they have other people who are sensitive to subtle energies, what they call subtle energies. And these people are able to detect fields around other people. But are they actually feeling it as if it's a magnetic field? We can't measure a magnetic field. So is it really magnetic? Is it electrical, as some of the people say? Can't measure it electrically. So is it really electrical? Or is it that they're detecting something that is not measurable using our current technologies? And they're considering that this is the field of the human body. There's some other things that you could measure around the body. One of them is body temperature with infrared light, galvanic skin response, conductivity on the skin, and then also biophotons. This is something you're going to hear as well, biophotons. Well, what are biophotons? It's really simple, actually. Biophotons are very low-level ultraviolet light emissions from organic material or organic matter. Any organic matter produces ultraviolet light. This is something back in the 1970s, a man named Fritz Popp popularized this. It was actually discovered in the 20s, but Fritz Popp talked about this in the 1970s, and everybody thought he was a little crazy. But what has occurred since then, in the next 50 years, up to the current time, this has become no longer this crazy edge science, but it's now biology. It's being studied in upper level biology courses in Japan and MIT, Stanford, Italy, in Germany, all over the world. There are people studying this in upper level biology. Why is this this ultraviolet light occurring? How is it occurring? And what is its purpose? It seems to vary with stress on organisms. Seems that some organisms, when they are injured, will produce more ultraviolet light. But other organisms, animals, whenever they are sick, will produce less ultraviolet light. Some researchers have also looked at it in terms of cell communication. Could it be means within the body? This is biology again. This isn't parapsychology. This is biology. Cell communication, causing the cells to communicate using light within the body. And there's also studies about the brain and whether neurons are being triggered using ultraviolet light. So this science has progressed a great deal, especially within the last 15 or 20 years. It's made a lot of progress. And at the Rhine, we have a bioenergy lab. And without going into the details of it, I'll say we have a very dark room where we measure these very, very low levels of light from people. And we bring in people who are healers, they say they're healers, people who are martial artists, or who do a lot of meditation. And we try to see if they produce more biophotons during this activity. And we find that, yes, we oftentimes see more biophotons, ultraviolet light from them when they're performing their healing activities. It's a lot more around bioenergy and biophotons, but I want to move on to some other examples of subtle energies that you might hear about. And one is the aura. A lot of people hear about biophotons and they say, well, okay, you're seeing light around the body. Obviously, that's the aura. Well, the aura is quite a different phenomenon. The aura is light that people see around physical bodies. And sometimes they see it in different colors. Ultraviolet light, the biophotons, are not visible. You can't see them. So the ultraviolet light really isn't the aura. But the auras are ways that some people, some healers oftentimes look at the body and they're able to see this light aura around it, and they're able to see different disruptions in the light or different colors. And those disruptions or those colors could indicate to them that a certain illness is occurring or that there's a certain level of health in that individual. That's that diagram up there on the top right where you see A, B, C, D, E, F. Those are actually a way many healing or subtle energy practitioners say there are different bodies. There is the physical body, but there's also the etherical body. There's the emotional body, there's the mental body, and then there's the greater body that is related to our connection to other people and our society. And this, so they see these different, they are actually bodies that they see that are separated from each other, like different levels. And oftentimes they can work within these different levels. Some talk about these as if they may be represented in the aura. In addition, that guy in the doing the lotus position with all those little dots on them, those are representative of the chakras. Chakras are energy centers that many practices see within the body. Eastern medicine uses this a lot, but there are many practices that use it. There are typically 7 chakras, but it actually varies anywhere from like 5 to 140 or so chakras. There's a lot of variation here. One of the things I want to say about chakras, they are these energy centers, and oftentimes healers will try to balance energies or move energies from these different chakras, trying to encourage them to be more, to improve health. You're going to hear a lot about the chakras from Margaret Moga, who's going to be speaking on the first night of the conference. She'll be speaking about all these topics. I'm not going to go into aura photography or Kirlian photography because I don't have time today, but I do want to mention one final topic here, and that's the terms ki, chi, prana. It's the life force energy in the body. You hear this from martial artists, Eastern practitioners. And this life force energy is what is present in a living body, but not present in a body that's not alive. There are also meridians that flow through the body, and you see that little diagram there with the red and blue on it. They're not nerves and arteries, but they're actually pathways that the energy might flow through. And this is where acupuncture points might be connected. Herbalism might affect this. Martial artists often discuss the meridians and chi or ki. So these are different terms you might hear. They're related to life force energy in Eastern religions.
Welcome back, everyone. John, I will say there was a fascinating moment during your talk when you were talking about the electrical disturbances. And suddenly, I don't know if it was anybody else or if it was just for me, suddenly everything cut out for a moment. And I thought, oh my God. And then it came back and I thought, okay, somebody's testing us here and using their actual.
I have a test for that, Mark.
That was pretty clever. If that was intentional, that was clever. So we've got about 10 minutes. And thank you for pointing out that there is not just one question, there are a bunch. So let's quickly, we've got a bunch here. Good gracious.
I'm happy to talk about anything you want here.
Let's. So the first one I saw that's been there for a while, right off the bat, was it says, let's see. There was one from William Mayer that said, what you seem to be describing in your micro PK work sounds a lot like what was being done. Well, you know what? Let's bring it up on the stage. There we go. I'll let you. And then at the Pairs Lab, are you essentially duplicating this research, or is your program clearly distinct?
That's probably the Pair Lab was working with micro PK. They were looking at random number generators, or random event generators, they called them, and trying to see if people could intentionally affect a quantum activity within these random event generators they had created. We're using the same tools. we were using their exact random event generators using the same process. There have been some newer ones that have been developed recently, but we're using the same tools. What they were doing at Princeton, which was an incredible program. I mean, it was amazing what they did. They were doing a proof-oriented study. Does this happen? And they had millions and millions of trials over 20, 25 years. What we're trying to do is take this a step further. Yes, we do have people affecting electronics, maybe random number generators, quantum events, but we're trying to figure out, well, can we learn about what it is? Can we understand? Can we do more process oriented? We're taking the next step. It happens. So that's where we're different from what was being done at Princeton. Princeton did great work to demonstrate it happens. Now we want to know, well, how does it happen? And so this is what we've been working on.
Understood. So before we take any other questions, one, thank you. That was fantastic work. And I know you prepared it for last year. And I know that you're doing, your convention again this year. So you have chaired it 2 years in a row. So thank you so much for this great work. Do you mind telling us a little bit about, based on, you referenced a lot of things about what's going to happen for the coming year, but that was for last year's conference. Do you have any thoughts about what's coming up for this year's conference that you want to mention, so that, people will be have that in their minds as this is a prep for that?
Sure. Well, this conference, it's a wonderful opportunity to really get to know people and get to spend time with people. Just like in here, we have the opportunity to kind of network a little bit and get to be able to sit down with people and have conversations. This is a different format that you'll see for the conference. It's using a format by Healthy Seminars. And I know you've seen the link on how to sign up, and I'm sure that it'll be posted if you don't see it right now. But what you'll see when you go there is you'll see a number of speakers. We have, I think, about 26, 28 speakers who are scheduled to give talks, as well as some invited speakers. But we also have a lot of what we're calling brief video presentations. And they're just 3 to 5 minute videos on a number of different topics by presenters. And so they'll be available for you to just browse through, go through 3 to 5 minutes on each of them, get a sense, a taste of the different research, and also have an opportunity to contact the researchers or the presenters and speak to them, and maybe have a little private conference with them, depending upon when they're available. So this gives you some other opportunities to learn about things and pick and choose what you're interested in. And we have a lot of, I'm sorry, Mark.
I'm so sorry. I just meant especially in regards to the PK work, like with just the presentation you just did in healing, some of those things. What are those things that people can look forward to in the conference?
Okay. Well, yes, I was just talking about the conference in general. So some of the presentations that are coming up, we have a whole section on that's going to be related to apports, kind of objects that just seem to appear out of nowhere. We have a presenter who's going to be talking about that. We have someone who's going to be talking about different PK that they've done at martial arts studio. They've noticed at martial arts studios and how they've done research related to this. Besides the PK, we also have people that are going to be talking about the subtle energies that I discussed. We have presentations that are going to be about healing and different theories and models for healing. I mean, some really, really great researchers. I'm sorry I didn't understand your question originally. And
my apologies, I wasn't clear on that. That's absolutely fantastic and very exciting. It kind of goes to what I'm going to end with, but not yet, which is about the practical effects of a lot of this and how we can use it in society. But we've got several questions that I've now seen are upvoted. So let's go ahead and ask some of those. I'm going to bring one from Shane Leridian, I believe, who's a Psi experiencer, and says, what resources do you recommend for people interested in learning forms of energy healing?
So my research is really not based on a specific form of healing. Okay. And so I know that I mean, you can find websites that talk about healing touch, talk about Reiki, talk about hands-on healing. Bill Bankston, I know someone had asked a little bit about, where can I find information about Bill Bankston's work? I don't know the specific website, but if you just search for Bill Bankston and healing, on the web. You can find his website and learn more about his method. He has a really great. I'm gonna plug his technique because it's something that I've learned more recently with a group of people at the Rhine. And he has a book called The Energy Cure, and he also has a learning program called Hands-On Healing. It takes a long time to learn. You have to be patient when you're learning healing. Some people will try to encourage you to learn Reiki in a weekend. You might learn some of the techniques, but to really understand it and master the techniques, you really have to spend time with it. So if you're looking for a way to learn about it, be patient and take your time with it.
Understood. Well, it's interesting when you mention that. It reminds me that if I remember correctly, the Institutes of Health, what is the federal agency that oversees a lot of these things?
NIH.
Thank you, NIH. And I didn't realize this until recently. Basically called the question with a lot of the energy healing organizations and things like that and said, all right, Reiki practitioners, we're basically going to let the states essentially license you and basically put you out of business if you don't come up with your own licensure. And so someone I know pointed out that they banded together and came up with these organizations that have essentially come out with things like this. And so I didn't even know this existed when I took my Reiki certification quite a while ago. And I haven't done, full research into all of that, but it's fascinating to see that that's even a thing. So you have that, you have all these other types of studies going on. The Emerald Gate Foundation is doing a lot of things. Institute of Noetic Sciences did their energy healers pilot study, and everything you've been doing for years and years at Rhine. So it's very exciting, and people should honestly come to the conference and see those videos you were talking about, because they can see the snippets on something and then get those questions answered. So let's wrap up in our final 2 minutes. Can you tell us a little bit about what are your thoughts about practical applications for things like the healing and the PK and the subtle energies? What are some things that either you have used or you've seen or that you dream of as next steps in the next years for where we're going to take this as a society?
Well, Mark, that's an interesting question, and I'm going to have to answer it this way. We use it all the time. We heal ourselves. We heal naturally. I mean, we have self-healing that occurs, and there are people who can encourage that in other people and help them to develop their own healing or to facilitate, create an environment for it to occur. In terms of PK or mind-matter interaction, it happens. And in fact, the study I did recently says it happens unintentionally and it affects electronics unintentionally. My thought is, if it's affecting electronics from unintentional activity and unintentional emotions, imagine how it's affecting how we're affecting each other. Being cautious and being aware that we are having an impact on the other people around us and on other things, it's important for us to keep this in mind as we go through our normal lives all the time. So I don't see a way that we have to develop ways to apply this. We are. What we need to develop is knowledge and awareness of it. One final thing I want to say before we close up is, when I did this, a year ago, and most of what I said there is I stand by everything that I said there, but there's an additional thing I learned, and that's that when you're doing healing or when you're doing any sort of activity like this, what seems to be most effective is doing it playfully, enjoying it, rather than taking it seriously and focusing and have fun with it, because healing occurs much more easily when we are enjoying ourselves. So that's where I would like to close today. Thanks, Mark.
Oh, John, that's fantastic. What a great way to end our session. And thank you so much for all of the work you have done throughout your whole life, for everything you've contributed to the field, to today's presentation, to the conference that's coming up, to all the work you're doing at the Rhine, just over everything, So thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
I'll be seeing you more over the next couple of weeks. So
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And with that, I think we'll go ahead and close our session because we have another one that we're going to immediately go into. So let's end this session and start our next one. Thanks, everyone. And John, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.